Hey everybody, this is Dr. Rachel with Better Balance Psychology, and I am here today with an awesome new guest. This is Dr. Emily. She is a natural family planning educator, and she is the founder of the Natural Family Planning Pharmacist. So before we jump any further, Dr. Emily, can you tell us what that means?
Yes. What is natural family planning? There are a lot of myths, but what natural family planning is paying attention to your body's natural signs of fertility, keeping track of those signs, and then using that information for either avoiding pregnancy effectively and naturally, optimizing timing for achieving pregnancy, or for monitoring your own health.
Okay, so when you say though, so that makes sense from the natural family planning educator. What's natural family planning pharmacist? I'm curious.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
They seem
I
kind
don't know.
of contradictory.
Right. Yes. I am a pharmacist. I have a doctorate in pharmacy, and I take that expertise and I help women choose natural alternatives to birth control. It's really my
Oh,
specialty.
fascinating. Yeah, that's really cool. It's a cool journey that you have there. So, thank you for joining us today. I'm really excited. And for listeners, viewers, we aren't just going to be talking about conceiving or not conceiving, though that is a big part of natural family planning. I specifically asked Dr. Emily to come in and talk to us more about educating us just on our natural cycles and how moods and energy levels very naturally just shift and change throughout the month based on our hormones, right? I'm sure every single one of the women listening could be like, So, Dr. Emily, do you mind just giving us an overview of our menstrual cycle and then how hormones play a role and what does that do to our moods and energy, all of the things? I'm just really excited to learn from you.
Yes, I would love to give an overview because there can be a lot of myths even about what our cycles are. A lot of women get educated about your period because that's a physical sign that you notice,
Mm.
and you may not realize that your period is only one small part of your cycle. So, the first day of your menstrual cycle is the first day of the bleeding of your period,
Mm.
or the medical term for your period is menses. So, you might hear the term menses too to describe those bleeding days. And then after that, what happens is your ovary releases a follicle, which is a little sac that is holding an egg. And during this time, the follicle is growing and growing. The lining of your uterus is growing and growing, and your body is releasing estrogen, and your estrogen levels are rising and rising. And so, this part of your cycle, when everything is growing, I like to call it the build up phase. Your estrogen is building up. This is called the follicular phase because that follicle is growing.
Sure.
So you have your period, your follicular phase, and then when estrogen gets to its highest level, that causes the release of another hormone called luteinizing hormone, or LH. And when LH is released, that causes ovulation. So, ovulation is the release of the egg. So, this is really the high point of your cycle. Your ovulation is at it, or your estrogen is at its highest point. That LH level has surged, and now that egg is being released. That egg sticks around for up to 24 hours. And then what happens is your hormone levels start to come down. So your luteinizing hormone rapidly declines, your estrogen level more slowly declines. And in this phase of your cycle, after ovulation, the hormone progesterone is produced. And progesterone is more of a calming hormone. It's a hormone that helps increase blood flow to the area. During this phase of your cycle, which I like to call the finish up phase, that time after ovulation until your next period, but you might also hear it be referred to as the luteal phase of your cycle. This is the time where your body is preparing for implantation of a fertilized egg if the egg was fertilized when it was released.
Sure.
And then if the egg is not fertilized, what happens is that uterine lining that had built up, it starts to shed off some of that excess lining. And that's what you see as the bleeding of your next period. And the cycle starts all over again.
Wow, this is intense. I mean, I have so many questions as an almost bio major, like I'm nerding out right now. But I want to stay focused because I'll do this privately with you one-on-one for my specific question. So okay, with the follicular phase, the buildup, right? And then
Yep.
ovulation sounds like it happens pretty quick. It's a really short phase.
Yes.
And then the luteal, or kind of the coming, like that's how I kind of saw at least the estrogen. But then you also were talking about progesterone. So as estrogen's coming down, progesterone's increasing.
Mhm.
Like all of this is just so fascinating from a biological standpoint. From a outwardly, so you mentioned that like the period is a physical aspect, right, to our cycle, and then we,
Mhm.
we all deal with it, and then we have all of our own feelings about that every month. But um what would be some other noticeable physical aspects to these hormone changes? So like estrogen rise and then fall, and then as that's falling, progesterone's rising. What might we also be feeling, seeing, doing during these changes?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really great question. And I'm really glad that you framed it up that way because our bodies do give us physical signs if we pay attention to them.
Mm,
So, what you may notice during your period or menses phase of your cycle, besides bleeding, is that you may feel the most fatigued in your cycle. This is the point of your cycle where your hormone levels are at their lowest levels. Progesterone is at its lowest level, and estrogen is at its lowest level. So, this is really a time of your cycle to rest and to recover, and your body is recovering from doing all that work of building up and letting go.
right.
Then during that buildup phase, when your estrogen is rising, what happens also physiologically is your cervix opens up and it starts producing a normal bodily fluid called cervical mucus or cervical fluid. And so, what you may notice during this part of your cycle in between your period and ovulation is that when you use the bathroom and you wipe, if you take a look at the toilet tissue before you throw it in the toilet, you may notice some of this cervical fluid or cervical mucus. Some women even notice it just left in their underwear, or you might just feel it when you wipe that, oh, it's kind of wet today. And
Mm,
that's some of that cervical fluid, and that's being produced because of that estrogen. And then at the time of ovulation, when estrogen is at its highest level, if you're paying attention to your cervical fluid, what you'll notice is that it becomes very clear in color, very stretchy, and very slippery feeling. This is where it can really feel wet when you're wiping. And this is the phase of your cycle where you feel your highest level of energy. So during that buildup phase, when estrogen is building, it's normal for our energy levels to naturally increase as well. And
interesting.
then when we're at this high point of our cycle, that's the time where we really feel most energy. Um, it's a time, if you think about it biologically and you think of our way ancestors, ovulation is the time when a woman can reproduce, right? And
Mm.
so naturally our energy is wanting us to communicate and connect with others. So this is the time where you might feel very social. You want to be out there, you want to be seen, and you want to see others.
Can that
And then
also, just really briefly, can that also translate to, modern day like productivity energy? Or is it primarily social?
definitely. No, it definitely can be related to productivity. You feel this
Focus or
burst of
something?
energy. This would be a great time if you have a business where go live on video, or you go speak somewhere. If you're paying attention to your cycle, planning that for your ovulation days would be excellent days to do that.
That's interesting. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, and then, so you're right, ovulation is the shortest phase of our cycle.
Mm.
So when that LH, luteinizing hormone, is released, that means you are going to ovulate within 24 hours. And then when that egg is released, it sticks around for up to 24 hours. So really the window of ovulation is about 48 hours long. So it's a short little window, but it's that burst, that climax of your cycle.
Yeah, sure.
And one other thing to mention, kind of related to that biological aspect too, is if you're in a romantic relationship, this is also the time where you may feel the most connected to your partner, where you may be most ready to be intimate.
Mhm.
So thinking about that as well.
Oh, definitely. And keeping that in mind for if you're trying to avoid or conceive pregnancy,
Exactly.
right? If that's
Yep.
on anyone's radar at that point in time, for sure. What
Yep.
about, you mentioned progesterone, so that last luteal phase, that's
Hmm.
like a calming hormone, I think you said.
Yes.
S- I guess that's interesting to me because I hear, as I'm sure a lot of women hear, like, so that leads into the PMS week, right? So that
Hmm.
week prior to, it sounds like cycle day one, but the bleed,
Hmm.
where like high irritability,
Hmm.
cravings up the wazoo, you know, things like that. But it's like
Hmm.
progesterone though is also, so talk to me about that, I guess. Make that
Yeah.
clear.
Yeah. So this last phase of our cycle in between ovulation and our next period, the finish up phase, I like to call it, or the luteal phase, your progesterone is released and gets to its highest level, and it kind of maintains this level for a while, and then it starts to drop off.
Okay.
So in a normal, healthy menstrual cycle, it's healthy to have a luteal phase that lasts between 12 to 14 days.
Okay.
And so, for women who experience more PMS irritability, this tends to be in the last 5 to 7 days before your period, when your progesterone level is starting to drop off before your period.
Okay. Sure. Sure.
And
So
so
go ahead.
that's where, yeah, that's where that discrepancy comes, where the progesterone is released. It's more of a calming. During this phase, it's normal to have kind of an energy of feeling more focused, feeling more inward, of wanting to just kind of take care of yourself, take care of things. And then, yeah, that end of your luteal phase can really depend if your body is able to sustain your levels of progesterone and have a very gradual decrease. Women typically don't have a lot of PMS symptoms. But if your body has a more sharp decline in progesterone, or maybe your natural progesterone levels are a little bit lower than average, then that's where you might be more prone to experiencing the irritability, cramping, bloating, some of those more physical signs as well.
So this is not, and I think we're getting better about this in our society, but we still have a long ways to go. I'm sure you would agree with me on that. This is not something that women like just make up. Like, this is a very real biological, hormonal. We didn't just wake up on the side of the bed wrong to be tearful at something or to snap at another thing. So is there anything that like women can do to either help or mitigate, or tracking, it sounds like, would be one.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
I don't know, you hear all these funky things with like eat this and don't eat that and drink this and get enough sleep. So from your perspective, what are some recommendations, as otherwise it sounds like we're just victim to this every single month.
Yeah, yeah, and that's definitely how I don't want women to feel. I don't want you to feel like a victim to your cycle. I want you to feel empowered that you know your cycle and you can work with your cycle. To touch on your first point there, yes, this is related to our biochemistry. Women have a natural rhythm. All of us, men and women, have this 24-hour circadian rhythm, right? You're more awake in the morning and then you get more tired as the day goes on. Well, women also have this second biochemistry related rhythm that's approximately 28 days related to our menstrual cycles. And so
Mhm.
you can kind of think of that, a 24-hour clock stretched out over a 28-day-ish time period
Sure.
with these different phases of our cycle. So it's very normal for us to feel differently during different parts of our cycle. And I do think that having that awareness, exactly, not beating yourself up because, man, today I just feel really inward. I don't want to see people. I just want to do my own thing. Or, man, I'm just really actually crappy today and I just want, yeah, to be alone. That's okay. And that's actually normal and healthy and part of our body's biochemistry. So part of it is just paying attention to your cycle.
Mhm.
And so, tracking the days that you have your period is great. And then learning to track, because like I said, ovulation is really that main point of your cycle. And that's really going to give you the most information. So whether you're paying attention to a sign like your cervical fluid, or you're doing something like a ovulation prediction kit or LH test strip where you're detecting your LH level in your urine to note when your ovulation time is happening. Women will use that for fertility, but you can also just use that to get a sense of where you're at in your cycle,
Sure.
for day to day without any tie to fertility. And then, yeah, as far as what can you do if you feel like, well, I realized that this last half of my cycle, that finish up phase of my cycle, I do feel a lot of PMS symptoms. I don't feel very good. One of the biological reasons for that might be that you are low in progesterone. So it might be something where you would want to follow up with a physician or a naturopathic doctor and ask to get some hormone levels checked. There are a number of things that can be done to assess hormone levels. That's not my specialty, but I do recommend that if women are paying attention to their cycle and then noticing imbalances, that then they start working with someone. And there are a lot of good practitioners for that, whether that's a physician who has more functional medicine, natural medicine training. A naturopathic doctor is great. Um, Acupuncture can be really great for hormone imbalances too. So there are a lot of options. So I don't want you to feel like you're just stuck with your cycle and you're just stuck feeling this way. It really is useful information for you.
Yeah, definitely. Any any specific, I guess, advice, and maybe this would be just so unique you couldn't speak to it, but like as far as like I said, foods or drinks, or like I mean, you go on the internet and you're going to get all sorts of information and contradictory information at that.
Mhm.
Um, does that matter? Not really.
You know, I haven't seen enough evidence that it matters.
Okay.
A book I would recommend is called In the Flow by Elisa Vitti. And she talks a lot about the phases of your cycle. And she does have a chapter that focuses on recommending different foods for different phases of your cycle. So you can look more into her resources, but the information that I've looked at so far, I don't think it makes a ton of difference. I do think that overall, your cycle is going to be more supportive if you're eating more natural, real, whole foods. You're staying away from some of the processed stuff. You're staying away from a lot of sugars, which can impact our hormones in a big way. But no specific foods that I would
Okay.
recommend.
That's interesting because I mean, when the cravings come, you kind of want to just eat anything that sounds good with no rhyme or I don't know. I'm speaking for myself apparently, but no rhyme or reason to it. It's just like I want everything.
Yeah, one little tidbit on food cravings is a lot of women that I work with do tell me that they crave chocolate in the last phase of their cycle, in that luteal phase. And craving chocolate can actually also be a sign of magnesium deficiency.
Hmm.
And low magnesium has also been tied to hormone imbalances. So if you are someone who finds yourself craving chocolate a lot, it might be worth asking your provider if you could get your magnesium level checked, or even just start on a over-the-counter magnesium supplement and see if that makes any difference for you.
Wow, that's interesting. So, last kind of big question. So, if sugar can impact hormones, I would make the assumption here that stress can also impact hormones in some way. Can you speak to that?
Definitely, definitely. Stress can have a big impact on our cycle. If you think about it biologically, ovulation and releasing an egg for possible development of a pregnancy and a child is a lot of work that your body is doing. And so if your body senses that you are under a lot of stress, whether that's a lot of physical stress or a lot of mental stress that you're holding on to, your brain is going to say, hold on, we are in a very stressed out environment right now. This is not a good time to bring a new life into the world.
Mm.
So, what you can see is either not ovulating or that your time of ovulation is delayed because of stress, and that's something I see quite a bit. I do work with some couples who are getting married and want to learn about tracking their cycles for fertility to prepare for marriage. But what I see not so uncommonly is in those couple of months before their wedding, that can be a very stressful time and there's a lot going on. And so their cycle can look really different where their ovulation day can be more delayed.
And I would even think then, so if the stress is impacting ovulation or lack thereof, it's going to either shorten or lengthen how long estrogen rises, if at all,
Hmm.
or progesterone.
Yes,
So like, so then the other associated, not fertility related concerns, but like the fatigue, the focus, the energy, like everything's kind of going to get wonky in that. It sounds like all due to
exactly.
stress.
Exactly.
Oh wow.
Exactly. Yep, yep, because part of that delay in ovulation is delayed in the rise in estrogen. So you're just going to be stuck in this low level of hormones in that time after your period days.
Wow, sure, sure.
Hmm.
Wow, this is so cool. Not gonna lie, it's a lot, but it's really it's really cool. The feminist in me is kind of like, why do only women need to do it? But that's a different conversation, evolutionary and blah blah blah. But it sounds like, if I'm hearing you right, a lot can happen. I don't know what I mean by that, but bear with me. A lot can happen just coming from the increased awareness that a woman can have on
Hmm.
her cycle alone. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Definitely, definitely. You can have more compassion for yourself when you know that, okay, I'm coming out of my ovulation days now. So even though I was just feeling really energetic and excited and social 2 days ago, now I don't feel that way. And that's okay. That's
Mm,
perfectly normal. The
mhm.
other part of it that I think is really awesome is if you start to pay attention to your cycle and your patterns, then you can use your patterns to plan future activities. So if you can predict, oh, my ovulation day is probably going to be upcoming in however many weeks, I'm going to schedule something big for my business that day, or I'm going to schedule a brunch at my house that day with some friends. And that can be really empowering too, and really trying to plan your life as much as you can to flow with your natural energy phase.
And that makes sense. Kind of, so there's a sense of agency or control that, I mean, within reason, everybody's life looks a little different, but to do what you can to try to work with the natural rhythm instead of just expect yourself to show up identical day to day. It just, that isn't how we're built, literally, biologically, biochemistry.
Right. Right. And
Sure.
the other thing with that, I just want to mention is exactly all of us have different lifestyles. You might be in a job where you don't get to pick when you do certain projects, you don't get to pick when you give a presentation. But knowing where you're at in your cycle means you can still work with your natural energies. So if you know that your boss wants you to give this big presentation during your luteal finish up phase, and you know that that's not a phase where you have a lot of natural energy, you can make sure that you get to bed earlier that night, that you eat a really nourishing breakfast, that you drink a bunch of water, that you're doing some extra care for yourself to work with that natural rhythm. It doesn't mean that you can't do anything on any day of your cycle. It's really just using this information.
Sure, that makes perfect sense. Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much for giving us some of your time today. I really have learned so much. I have follow-up questions I'll speak to you privately about, but I think this is just such good information, especially this is where we overlap, right, with how the stress impacts the natural cycle and energy and mood, and just trying to support women in that way. So Dr. Emily, if people have more questions, concerns, they want to work with you one-on-one, where can they go to get more information?
Yeah, the best place to go is my website, which is www.nfppharmacist.com, all one word, two P's there. And you can, my contact information is right on there. You can see my services right on my homepage. You can join my free pre-recorded workshop called Know Your Body with Natural Family Planning to dive into what we talked to today a little bit more in depth.
Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you again. Really appreciated it. Hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you so much for having me.
Bye-bye.